Welcome to In This Mad World with Andrew Marshall and Chelsey G, looking at the world beyond the headlines. Okay, welcome to In This Mad World. This is episode 19. Wow, we have 19 episodes.
19 episodes, wow.
We are recording this on the evening of May 14th. This episode is an overdue update on the situation in Gaza, which is the subject that we really started this podcast with. And we have failed to cover this subject since the war restarted.
Yes.
There was a 2-month ceasefire, and then the war restarted almost exactly 2 months ago. So just for listeners, a reminder, May 14th, the situation is moving very, very fast, especially this week. Trump is in the Middle East. There's potential deals taking place. We don't know what's going to happen. Israel has said that they're basically planning a major ground invasion, possibly for the day that Trump returns back to America or the day after. So we don't know. Everything's in flux. So by the time this episode is published, maybe in the best case scenario, there will be a ceasefire that was forced upon Israel.
Worst case scenario, ground invasion.
Yeah.
All the horrible things.
And it continues.
It continues as is.
So
if not worse, actually, I should say, not as is, worse.
Correct. And
if you can believe it gets worse after they bombed an emergency room entrance today, it can get worse.
We both saw that footage outside of a hospital entrance.
And how do they even justify that?
Driveway. Well, they did. So it was for listeners. The footage showed it was a hospital driveway. So the entrance route to drive up to the hospital was bombed.
Numerous civilians walking around.
The footage showed just tons of people there.
Tons of foot passengers.
Little kids walking by. And then actually when it was at its busiest is when you saw people start to run because they heard the missile coming.
Yeah.
And then it was 2 large craters. And the rationale that was given was that there was let
me guess. Hamas is operating.
But not just that, because what's their favorite thing when it's to do with a hospital?
That they're operating underneath it?
Yes, but there's even the additional, there's 2 words.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I feel like as soon as you say it, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, Hamas Command Center.
Right, the command center.
Yeah, and specifically,
here we are again.
Yes, and specifically, they believed that the brother of Yahya Sinwar, who is the former head of Hamas in Gaza that was killed back in October.
Because he's now stepped in place, right?
Yeah, his brother kind of stepped in. And so it was apparently that his brother was at the quote unquote Hamas command center underneath the entranceway to this hospital, which now coincidentally is vehicles can no longer enter.
Yeah.
To get people in emergency situations. Yeah. And just for the record of listeners, the Israelis tend to say everything they bomb is a quote-unquote Hamas command center. Mm-hmm. Back in October of 2024, right on Canadian Thanksgiving. That's October, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I know, it's America that has it in November.
Yeah.
Weirdos.
So back during that period of time, there was an Israeli bombing of a hospital courtyard where they had tents put up for patients because there was patient overflow. The hospital couldn't hold everybody. Wasn't there
kids playing in there because they had just attacked a refugee camp that was an old school that was housing kids.
That was just last week.
No, I know, but even last year, I remember them doing that in front of a hospital.
Yeah, all the
time. I was following my son at that time, and she was in the hospital corridor.
Right. Oh yeah, that was a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but this was just in. Sorry.
That's how many hospitals they bombed. Do you know what I mean? How many places that they've attacked that are total war crimes.
Yeah.
And yet somehow, like, it's still happening.
29 out of 36 hospitals are out of service in Gaza.
And isn't this supposed to be like one of the smartest military in the world? Like Israel, like, don't they tote themselves for being like so logistic and so good at what they do? But then it's like, here we are consistently killing civilians. And we know you're good at what you do because of what you did in Lebanon with the attack there, right? Very precision, very precise. So if that's the case, we know that you would be able to get them if they were, hypothetically speaking, underneath the hospital. You've shown us that you're capable of being much cleaner.
Right. But so back during this October attack on the hospital, where there was in the tents area where they bombed that. That's when we saw the footage of the 19-year-old kid who had previously been bombed by Israel, ended up at the hospital with injuries.
Oh my God, right.
And was put on the IV. And he was in the like patient overflow out in the courtyard in the tent section, along with his family, it should be said, who were all there and also injured in previous Israeli bombing. And the Israeli bombing set off like a gas tank, and a fire just exploded.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And that's when we saw the footage of this 19-year-old kid writhing in pain. You could see his arms moving, the IV still attached, while he was literally on fire, engulfed in flames. And nobody could help him. Everybody just watched him burn to death. His entire family also burned to death with him there. It's just that he was the one that was seen in the video footage of, you could see his arm moving around. And we saw that again, actually, just not too long ago, because another tent area was bombed from some journalists. And I saw footage of another person writhing in pain who was on fire. People actually got him out. I thought like he was moving, but it looked like just...
I mean, he's not going to survive that though, right? Because there's nothing they can
He didn't
give
survive
him. Yeah,
he was taken to the hospital. He survived like the evening and then died the next day.
I was watching an interview actually the other day with a physician that was like volunteering in Gaza, and so he had fentanyl like in a injection tube, like a... I'm sure it was in a needle injection tube. And he had that with him, like, just because obviously he's like, you know, I've been in war zones before. I understand that often there's not anesthetics there or like things to work, anesthesia for working on them and trying to give them pain meds. And so, but he is a pediatric, like emergent doctor. So he deals with the kids, and he was talking about how being in the room, like in the emergency room and just like in the hospital in general, how he would decide which child got what. And so they were asking, and he said that he would choose by basically being like, if that child was going to die, I would just let them die in the pain.
I saw
that was so hard, because I thought he was going to say the opposite. Like, I thought he would be like, you know, like, I'm going to let them go in peace. But then when he really said why, I was like, oh my God, that's so much, makes sense. But it's also like, what a like
triage,
and just the how he must have to get through that, like whatever he's doing to like turn off to be able to make such a decision is so horrific. Like, I think the fact that that's even like having to be decided or made. I don't know. I've watched lots of interviews, and I've watched lots of. I just don't recall hearing such horrendous, like, intentional pain caused to like children. Like, we obviously know what happens, but it's so open, and so the hate is so strong, like, for a child that's just like different, like that, just because of where they were born. Like it's just, and not just in Israel, right? Like, it's like I see it everywhere where there's like so little sympathy, like for those children and people and men and women that are there. It's so difficult to watch.
Yeah. Well, and so when this 19-year-old kid was burned alive on camera for everybody to watch, the response of the Israelis was there was a Hamas command center in a tent in front of a hospital. Like, this is just so incredulous.
Like, what a reach.
Beyond.
Were they also in the NIC unit with like the 10 babies that you left to starve to death there?
Well, exactly.
Like, what's the reason for that?
You know, and they just say this anytime something like this happens. And we'll get into another incident a little later in this episode, but I'll just mention it just so we can put a pin in it and remember. But the the 15 medics and first responders in Rafah, which
Yes.
happened in at the end of March, beginning of April. So just remind me to get back to that one when we
Yeah.
cross that bridge. But we should, I think it would be helpful to first go back a bit to the start of the year, because the ceasefire was put in place. Well, first of all, just a quick rewind. The war began October 7th, 2023, right? We had
Yeah.
the Hamas attack, and then Israel started bombing Gaza, I think within 4 hours of the attack, like before they even went and started helping their communities that were under attack, because that took 8 hours to get to some places. They were already bombing Gaza before.
Well, I mean, they were attacking their own people.
Well, that too.
We know they were doing that.
Hannibal directive is what that is called. But so there was a brief, I think it was a 6 or 7 day ceasefire in November, about 5 or 6 weeks into the war. Because the first 5 or 6 weeks, you had on October 9th, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, declare, sitting alongside a bunch of generals, and he's a former general himself, saying, no food, no water, no electricity,
Yes.
nothing gets into Gaza. These are human animals, and we will treat them accordingly.
Yeah.
And that,
Ugh,
incidentally,
God, I
is
hate him.
why he is wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, for the crime of starvation, alongside Prime Minister Netanyahu. Yoav Gallant is no longer the defense minister. He was fired by Netanyahu and replaced with somebody who's considered to be a lot more of a hardliner than him, a man named Israel Katz. So this war criminal general was too much of a dove and a lightweight for this cabinet. So he's replaced with a much harsher defense minister now. But back at the start of the war, that's when you had the most intensive bombing campaign that basically surpassed anything seen since World War II. And that's not hyperbole. That's according to actual spatial satellite studies of destruction conducted by several academic experts in the United States, and I believe also the United Kingdom. They've been published in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post.
Well, hasn't it like been bombed in more tons now than like Hiroshima?
It's more than the equivalent of 6 nuclear weapons.
Yes, like it's
Gaza.
like, and just for our listeners, if you don't know what we're talking about, honestly, after this, just go and like Google the site images side by side. Like you can do it; it'll come up, and it's frightening.
Like, you mean Google Hiroshima versus?
No. Sorry. Circling back to the thing that you were saying, just like seeing the disaster from all the carpet bombing, like to see the actual cities and camps, like is shocking.
Oh, yeah. Oh, like the before and after of Gaza.
Yeah, the before and afters that they've been doing side by side so that people can visually like see the disaster and how rapid it was. Like,
yes. And so that was only the first while. And the first while, also back in 2023, was when you had the massive blockade and siege, no food, no water, like Yoav Gallant said.
Yeah.
But that turned so awful so fast that the Biden administration was like, that's it, you got to allow some stuff in, you got to allow some aid in, you can keep bombing them and blah blah blah, continue to treat them quote unquote like animals, but you got to let some aid in, because we can't, like, how can America continue to help you if you're deliberately starving 1 million children? Gaza, incidentally, 2.2 million people, 970.
Yeah, it's like almost half the population is children.
Are children.
Yeah.
So eventually, after about 5 or 6 weeks, the heaviest part of the blockade was lifted. They allowed some aid. Everything that the Israelis did was the bare minimum, right? When they were forced to allow aid in, they allowed in maybe like 20 to 50 trucks a day instead of the pre-war number of 500.
I think, wasn't it? Yeah, like 300 to 500 trucks a day.
500.
Yeah, they were letting from, I think what the number that I remember seeing was 30 a day.
Yeah, there would be like it was basically between 20 and 50 a day, and whenever they were questioned on it, they would say nobody else in the history of warfare has ever been so kind or generous as us, and given so much aid. First of all, ignoring the fact that they had to be blackmailed by the Americans in order to even allow in the bare minimum, and that the bare minimum was not enough because 500 aid trucks per day was the norm before the war began, because Gaza has been under siege since 2007
Yeah.
and has always been in need of aid and support. And before the war, 40% of Gaza's population was dependent upon food aid for their daily meals. So the idea that you just cut that all off and you would now
Horrific.
allow in, what would that be, at best 10% of the pre-war number. And so pre-war, 500 per day. Obviously during war the needs are greater, right? You need
Yeah.
more, and then there's 10% of what the pre-war norm was. So it was just dramatically insane, horrific, monstrous, inhumane. But that was those first 5-6 weeks until you had that first ceasefire in November, 5 or 6 day, where they released some hostages, they relaxed some of the restrictions, started to allow some aid in. That was kind of what changed it. But then there was no more ceasefires. That was after 5 weeks back in 2023. And then they continued talks for a ceasefire. But President Biden introduced something in May of 2024, being like, we have this plan. The Israelis agreed to it. And then the Israelis were like, we didn't agree to shit.
Agree. Yeah.
Which
constant.
is their standard.
Constant. Like Hamas would agree. They'd be like, okay, let's do it. And then they'd be like, nah,
yeah,
we're not going to do that. You guys are monsters. You try to kill our hostages.
Exactly.
Like, we're trying to give them back.
Yeah.
Like, take them, but give back the like 20,000 of ours that you have, like in prisons.
Right.
Like, that's an exaggerated number. I'm actually,
it's actually
probably
10,000.
Yeah, it's like 10,000, I think.
10,
but and that's like that we know of. Sorry, you guys just sort of just saw my PP come through.
It's just a blur in the background.
Are you gonna say hi? Oh, throwing up the peace sign. We're live. He's doing the cat litter.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, so there was ongoing talks for a ceasefire. The Biden administration was constantly trying to get the Israelis on board, and they just Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, would just constantly scuttle that, never agreed, always constantly putting up roadblocks.
So much.
And then Trump won the election, November 2024, and then Trump was ready to be inaugurated. But between his election win and the inauguration, which was January 20th, 2025, the Biden team and the Trump team both worked together to mediate a ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel. And obviously with Trump coming in, the Israelis wanted to like give, a bit of a fig leaf, they wanted to ingratiate themselves towards Trump, right? They wanted to be like, here's a gift and look kindly upon us and we're your buddies. But it was still the Biden administration that did most of the work. It just required the Trump team to be like, we're on board, so you better get on board Israel. And so they signed onto the agreement. The ceasefire went into effect. Phase 1. It was supposed to be like a 2 or 3 phases.
Yeah. 3 phases.
And so phase 1 went into effect on January 19th, the day before Trump's inauguration, right? So this was supposed to be like, oh, Trump was promising peace, and the first day of his presidency, oh, he brings peace. So yes, okay.
Well played.
Yeah, so it was
3 months of sheer hell after that.
Yeah, so a bunch of theatrics. But hey, like a ceasefire actually took place.
Yeah.
Now, what that means in practice, well, first of all, let's go to the phase. Phase 1 of the ceasefire was supposed to last for 2 months, so until March 19th. And it was to involve the release, of dozens of hostages held by Hamas or other groups in Gaza. which is also to be met with more entrance of aid trucks, relaxation of restrictions, and release of, I believe, up to like 1,000 Palestinian prisoners
Yeah.
From Israeli jails. And the Israeli politicians just call them all terrorists, but it's just, it could be a baker.
Like half of them are kids. Like there's like
Yeah.
I think the youngest kid in that prison is like 3. Like it was like 2 or 3 years old. It was like a child that they took.
Israel has the unique distinction of being the only country on this planet that tries children in military courts.
It's so shocking. Like that one, there's like and then I know like we're going somewhere with this, but there is like one kid who was arrested like in the early 2000s, and he like now has like brain damage, like due to the beatings. Like he truly is. He's still not charged. Like, and he's now a full grown man.
Yeah.
He's not medicated. Like it's just so difficult to look at. I've been like following his case for so many years. It's just so hard to watch like him be. I think he was like 7 or 8 years old when he was arrested, and now he is like in his late 20s, and he looks like a 30-year-old man, like untreated. It's so horrific.
Yep.
And if this was happening anywhere else, we would like everyone. I mean, it does happen in other places for sure that people don't talk about. Like I'm sure there's other places where that goes on.
Well, not where children get tried in military courts.
That's true, actually. But like where I'm sure Israel. Kids are. Yeah, that's true. Because I mean,
you have like, it's not that atrocities against children don't happen.
Yeah, because I feel like I guess they're not military like trials, but I mean what they're doing to kids in the U.S. right now, like immigration wise, like some of those things are like camps and like where they're sitting in front of judges without any legal representation, and they're like 3 years old. Yeah, it's like shocking.
Those are still civil courts, though.
That's true, but it's just like wild to see that a child is in that position anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Let alone to be military. Like it's just so twisted, and they torture children there.
They do, yeah, including sexually.
They don't see children as like they don't see them as human.
Not Palestinian children.
No,
certainly
not.
And yeah, so
phase 1, they were releasing hostages. They released 1,000 hostages from jails, and then
they were supposed to anyway. Yeah. So and it was supposed to go, in like different parts. So there was like one day where you'd have releases, and then another day where you'd have it's kind of staged throughout the 2-month period. And then that was supposed to lead about 4 or 5 weeks into phase 1. They were supposed to begin talks on phase 2 negotiations of the ceasefire. And phase 2 was supposed to begin, obviously, after phase 1 ends. But phase 2 was supposed to deal with the talks of a final end to the war and the release of all the remaining hostages.
Mm-hmm.
It was, however, the issue of the final end to the war that really caused problems for the Israelis. Now, when Israel agreed to the ceasefire in January, there were 2 individuals who made specific, through their actions and statements, what the real deal was happening. That was happening. And one was Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, mm-hmm. who is the most extremist in the Netanyahu cabinet. He's the most deranged, most racist, most...
Didn't the U.S. like just host him somewhere?
Yep.
Yeah, he was like just in New York or something insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meeting with other rabid extremists who are trying to bring about the end of the world. Like literally, I'm not even joking. That's their objective. Like, religious extremists. It's fun.
Yeah.
Put them in charge of a country with nukes. And so, yes. So Itamar Ben-Gvir, in charge of the police and prisons, which is why abuse on both counts has gone up dramatically. And so he quit the Bibi Netanyahu cabinet and resigned his post in protest, because for him, the idea that the war would stop is inconceivable. This is
Yeah.
supposed to be a total war. This is supposed to be the war
Yes.
to reconquer all of the land of Israel and
This
to
is the
push out
same
all.
man that like helped a rapist be released from jail, like, and tried to actually talk about if rape should be allowed in prisons.
Yeah, he's one. He's one of those people
Of the
from
men.
that. Yes, from the party that he leads, the Jewish Power Party,
Yes,
which is
yes.
exactly what it sounds like. And so he quit, but he maintained, like, his closest advisor basically took over his ministry, and he remained in contact with everybody. And he even publicly said while he was not in government that he's still on the phone with everybody and everybody's still following his plan, and that he's still in contact with everybody in charge and he'll be back soon. So basically he's just like
So
on
it's
a
like, why'd you quit?
vacation.
Like, you freak? Like,
To make a public show of it, and to be
But
and to make public pressure, because the thing is that in Israel, for a governing coalition to work, you need, because there's
no, for
120
sure.
seats.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Like,
just
I
to
get
explain.
it, but it's
No,
just
no,
like,
no. But to explain for our listeners.
yes, yes. Yeah.
So in the Knesset, there are 120 seats. That's the Israeli parliament. To form a government, you need like 61 seats. You need the majority, 62, 61. You cannot govern without the majority. So Netanyahu's government had, I believe, 162, 62 seats in the 120.
You're thinking about our numbers.
Right. And so his government ruled by a very, very thin majority, and it depended upon the support of these extremist right-wing parties. And it was an alliance particularly between the parties of Itamar Ben-Gvir and another extremist settler, Bezalel Smotrich, who is the finance minister and also has a small portfolio in the Defense Department, which allows him to oversee the settlements in the West Bank, where he lives. And so Smotrich, while Ben-Gvir quit, Smotrich stayed in the cabinet, which allowed Netanyahu to maintain his majority. And so that, because if you lose the majority, then there can be a vote of non-confidence, and your government could collapse, and you could have new elections, and you could lose your power, blah, blah, blah. So Smotrich stayed on, which meant that Netanyahu's government could remain. But Smotrich stayed on under one condition, and it was that there will be no phase 2 of the ceasefire. When phase 1 ends, the fighting restarts. If the war does not restart, Smotrich will quit. That's the threat, and then the government will fall. And Netanyahu, if his government falls, then he's
dead.
Yeah, he's facing so many corruption charges that he needs to be prime minister in order to evade justice.
His future.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
He needs to remain in power, or he could be in prison for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Because while he's in power, he and these right wingers are all pursuing reforms that are undermining the judicial system. Again, does this sound familiar? And undermining the courts so that they can evade and also justify their even more gross and horrific expansion and imperialism and racism and fascism.
They're so disgusting.
So those were the conditions of the ceasefire. And it was very clear that Israel had no intention of ever moving to phase 2. And so when the phase 2 discussions were supposed to begin, already like a month into the ceasefire, the Israelis simply refused. And then it was a couple more weeks, and the Israelis were trying to push this line. And then they got the support of the Trump administration, who backed them up on this, to say that, instead of moving to phase 2, why don't we get Hamas to agree to an extension of phase 1, which means that it goes for a few more weeks and they release more hostages. And I don't think the Israelis said that they'd release more prisoners, but maybe allow more like aid in, or just allow the ceasefire to continue.
Yeah.
But Hamas was basically like, no, you signed on to this ceasefire that we all signed on to, and it says that phase 2 starts, and you're not just going to keep kicking the can down the
Yeah, like
road.
let's stick to our plan. Like
Yeah,
we made an
because
agreement.
this is you violating the ceasefire. But the Americans got behind the Israeli line, and so then they both started to say that Hamas refuses Israel's offer of a ceasefire extension. So those were the headlines, when in fact it was Israel and the US try to strong arm Hamas into changing the terms of the agreement more than halfway through it.
Of course.
Therefore, in other words, violating the ceasefire,
And I
which
mean, they
Hamas
were
had adhered
violating
to.
it in other ways too.
Well, that is the next point here, is
Yeah.
that they absolutely were. There were, first of all, claims throughout that Israel was making that Hamas continuously violated the ceasefire. Now, there isn't really evidence for that. The closest that it came to was that Israel then started demanding that Hamas stop. Oh, the one thing that I think was like the closest thing to an actual violation was that Hamas released the name of the wrong body, the wrong name of the body that they released, because they were releasing hostages dead and alive at certain points, because several have died um, either on October 7th when they were taken into Gaza, or from Israeli bombing since, or God knows what else. So there was apparently an instance in which a body that was released had been misidentified ahead of time, and then the Israelis were furious. But I mean, that was more of a mistake than some, violating terms of ceasefire thing. And they
Yeah.
quickly rectified it and released the correct person after that. But other than that, the Israelis were just complaining that Hamas was using the hostage releases as a big PR stunt, which they were. Like, I remember watching it, it was like big theatrics, like they had a stage and posters, and it was all, and cameras, and it was all this stuff. And they would bring the hostages out, put them in front of the cameras, and then put them in the Red Cross vehicles to be taken away. It was a whole, thing. But Israel was like, this is violating the ceasefire. It wasn't. Was it propaganda? Absolutely. But was it in violation of the ceasefire? No. And as if Israel doesn't do propaganda, they just are
Literally.
worse at it.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the
Constant.
Israelis were ordering, during their releasing of Palestinian prisoners, particularly in the West Bank, they were demanding that there be no celebrations for released prisoners. And they were telling the military and police in the West Bank to enforce this. Hamas was having PR stunts when they release, but meanwhile, the Israelis are ordering no joy, no celebrations, just very typical fascist fashion. No expressions of joy allowed, permitted. So there was that component, but then the Israelis were, first of all, not allowing as much aid in as they were supposed to, actually, as per the terms of the agreement, which included holding back tens of thousands of tents and shelters that were needed. Because once the ceasefire went into effect, you had all these Palestinians in Gaza who had been crowded into so-called quote unquote safe zones, which were also not safe,
Yeah.
but compared to the rest of Gaza, were moderately existing. And then the Palestinians were going back to their homes that they haven't been able to reach for almost a year and a half. So a lot of Palestinians were walking north back to northern Gaza, which is actually Gaza City, and various other areas. First of all, as they were walking these streets, they were getting shot at by Israelis, who were blocking their path. What is talking about a violation of a ceasefire?
Yeah, literally.
Shooting people.
And even like if anyone remembers, like when they did their ceasefire with Lebanon, I mean, they were breaking that 24/7. Like they are like the king of breaking ceasefires.
Yeah, and they still have their ceasefire with Lebanon, and they're still breaking it. So they'll bomb Beirut. They just did that a couple weeks ago, in fact, which is also and they've also been pushing phase their first phase of the Lebanon ceasefire because they don't want to move to the second.
Yeah.
And so they just simply didn't.
No.
The second phase was supposed to be Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon, and the day before that they were supposed to withdraw, the Israelis said, we're actually going to keep 5 key strategic positions in southern Lebanon. And then everybody was like, oh, but that's a violation. And the Israelis are like, okay. Like, what are you going to do about it? And they bombed in Damascus, Syria, right next to the presidential palace as a warning to the new leader of Syria.
Yeah.
Don't come south, where the Israelis expanded their occupation. Don't do
so
what
insane.
we don't want. Yeah. So yes. So the Israelis, between January 19th, when the ceasefire began, and mid-March, when it fell apart, the Israelis killed about 150 Palestinians in the West Bank. That was the stat that I read. In different bombings, shootings, many of them kids, many of them farmers, people on the coast, people trying to get to their agriculture. Just in different circumstances. There were 2 Israeli soldiers in this same period of time in Gaza who were killed, but not by Palestinians. They were killed from a crane that they themselves brought that collapsed. So like friendly fire by crane, I guess. But the Palestinians and Hamas adhered to the ceasefire, to the terms. The Israelis continuously killed. Compared to what it was before, I mean, you can't. Like, it was 150, like it's awful to say this in one sense. 150 people over 2 months is minuscule compared to what was happening without the ceasefire. So it's not to say that it's the exact same as it was before. It wasn't, and that was certainly a reality that was felt for the Palestinians in Gaza. Like, you don't have drones blaring overhead all day, every day. It's not the constant bombing and stuff like this. So, but then the day that the ceasefire ended, March 18th, the Israelis went buck wild crazy, bombed like a maniac, and killed 400 people in 24 hours, including 130 children in that first day of returning to war.
That makes me so sick.
Even going back to before the ceasefire was broken. So at the start of March, it was very clear that the Israelis had no intention of moving to phase 2. They were trying to restart the war, and they were creating this manufactured crisis with Hamas that they unilaterally changed the terms of the ceasefire and then claimed that Hamas was violating it. So they said that because at one point during the releasing of hostages, Israel said that Israel delayed the release of 600 prisoners, and Hamas said, fine, then we're not going to release. Or Hamas was pissed off because they had released 6 hostages earlier that day, before Israel announced that they are not releasing 600 prisoners.
Yeah.
And Hamas said, like, WTF, like, what the hell? We released that. Okay,
we did what we said we were going to do.
Exactly. And so they said, well, fine, then we're not going to release the next 6 hostages on Saturday.
Yeah.
And then Israel said, like, Hamas threatens to violate ceasefire. And that's when Trump said, Hamas better release the hostages by Saturday or all hell will break loose.
Yeah.
And then Hamas said, okay, fine. And so,
which is so, like, it's just like the bullying tactic, right? Of like, like Trump, and like, it's just so insane to watch like what these governments are doing and how we all are like, this is so illegal, but here we are.
Well, and ironic that you use the word bullying, because when Trump literally was making this threat in the White House of all hell to pay, he went on to describe Hamas as bullies.
No, like, he is a bully.
Yeah, like literally mid bullying. He's like, wow, they're such bullies.
He's such a bully. Like, he's like the biggest bully. Like, and I feel like it's so lame to use that term in this situation because he's worse than that. He's like a sexual predator. I'm sure he's got a couple hits under his belt. Like, he is not. He's worse than a bully.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure.
And then Netanyahu's a murderer. So.
Oh yeah, he's just a complete psychopath.
Mass psychopathic murderer.
Yeah, and then so concoct this whole Hamas is violating the ceasefire that we unilaterally changed, and have now put these new fantastical demands on them. But then they bowed to the pressure and just went with it and adhered to the agreement, and then the Israelis kind of went with it a bit. But then comes March 1st, and the Israelis are like, okay, we are now cutting off food, fuel, and humanitarian aid to Gaza, because we don't like what Hamas are doing. We want we are, quote unquote, like, this was supposed to, quote unquote, increase pressure on Hamas to release all the remaining hostages. They just decide, now, fuck the agreement, fuck the ceasefire, we're just doing our own thing. Even though technically the ceasefire was still ongoing for like almost 3 more weeks, but on March 1st they're like, now we have a brutal blockade and siege, and then started threatening to cut off electricity and water. And once you cut off electricity, you cut off like the desalination plants, which help turn water in drinkable water. And if they're not bombing the desalination plants, they're cutting off electricity to them. So they were now clearly going the starvation siege route, like they did in the very beginning. 5 weeks. So this is their strategy of increasing pressure. But if the idea here is just, we don't want to move to the next phase, we don't want to end the war, we want to restart the war, and we want to starve you and deprive you and besiege you, what exactly is the pressure that Hamas has to release hostages? Like if that's the ask, what is the gain?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they say, okay, we'll release all the prisoners, but then Israel's like, well, we're still going to return to the war. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just an excuse. Like, what's the motivation? If there's no agreement, like, that was the whole point of the ceasefire. You get the rest of the hostages for ending the war. Mm-hmm. Whereas Israel's like, no, we're not going to end the war, but you're still going to give us all the hostages.
Yeah.
But then Hamas is like, so we give away our one bit of leverage left. And for what? For nothing. Literally for nothing.
Literally for nothing.
So there's this idea in Israel that is pushed that, you only get the hostages back through use of force, which has been proven time and time again to be wrong. The times that they got the most hostages back was when they stopped using force and worked through ceasefire negotiations. I believe there was like one really big dramatic military operation where they actually rescued, I think it was like 1 or 3 hostages, but killed like 150 Palestinians in the process. And that was like the one time that they were like, see, you can use warfare to capture hostages. And then there's all the other times where they just killed their own hostages, including like the 3 Israeli guys. Hi, Fords.
Mostly scratch you. Okay. Oh gosh. Well, can you just head back to your room for a little bit, and Mommy will be right with you. I'm just gonna turn this camera off because you're not wearing any bottoms. Give me a kiss. I love you. Okay, I'll see you in a minute. Okay. Love you.
Love you too.
Oh, I don't even get that. It'll be like, and then he just leaves. But anyways, he just threw me right off. I felt like all of a sudden his little face was here. I was like,
I know, I saw your reaction. You're like, what is that, a raccoon?
Literally. I was like, is there a bug on me? Oh no, it's just my son.
It's my son.
Classic. He's like a spider.
It just appears.
Literally.
Yeah.
Good call. We need a water.
A little water break.
Yeah.
So where was I?
We were just talking about just like the continuous ways that they sabotage certain things, right? Like, because they were
Right. So the prolonging or
yeah, so they like
abrogating.
continue to like, so now they're doing the same thing they were doing in the very beginning, but now
Correct.
they're
Right.
dragging out the starvation. We're talking
Right.
going into it like we're going into the plans, right? Which is that what
Yes.
that everybody was horrified by when Trump even brought it up. And now it's like maybe it's not going to be some beach resort, but it's very evident what they're doing.
Right. Well, oh yes. So of course we forgot to mention that part where back in February, the first big Netanyahu Trump meeting, Trump declares his solution for Gaza, which is
Yeah.
to quote unquote take it and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. We're gonna hold it.
Outrageous.
We're gonna clear it out. All the Palestinians will be gone, and we're gonna make a bunch of hotels and make it like a rich people paradise, and that it's gonna belong to the U.S. Like it's a total insane plan,
Yeah.
and predicated on ethnic cleansing, because it presupposes, and in fact doesn't even presuppose. He has stated outright that they all have to leave and they're not welcome back. They being the Palestinians.
It's so ridiculous.
So that was Trump's Gaza plan, which Netanyahu embraced, and the Israelis
Loved.
were
I
the
mean, he gave him a gold pager.
yeah, that's right. Which
Insane.
which for our listeners is a reference to the
The pager
operation
attacks.
in Lebanon in the summer when Israel had coordinated, what was it, like thousands of pagers
Yeah.
to explode all over Lebanon. Like hundreds were killed, maimed. It took out most of the middle,
bystanders.
took out
Like,
most of the middle leadership of Hezbollah.
yeah.
Killed
But
some children as well.
You know, they just can't seem to hit that Hamas command center.
Right?
Right? But I mean, they can
Even when it's out in the open in a
thousands
hospital
of beepers. Like,
Oh,
it's
exactly.
crazy. And then
Yeah,
people just
and
eat it up. They're like, oh my God, like, you guys, this is crazy. It's like, you're crazy. Like, the fact that you're believing this crazy ass story is crazy.
Well, we've seen when the Israelis undertake a targeted assassination, there can be an apartment building, and they'll have a missile strike into the specific apartment window.
Literally.
And kill all the people inside, and the rest of the building remains unblown
Untouched.
up. And yet in Gaza, it's there was an accountant who worked at the Ministry of Finance in Gaza. Let's blow up his entire family home.
Yeah.
That was actually,
and the block and like the neighboring building, just because one of them might have ran.
Yeah.
They don't. It's just crazy.
I saw a piece. It was either BBC or Channel 4 UK on YouTube the other day, where it was taking a look at this bombing that took place in Gaza last week or the week before. I remember seeing footage at the time of just the aftermath, where it was people in one apartment building were filming across to the roof of an apartment building across from them, because the building that they were standing in had been targeted by an Israeli missile, but it was so powerful that several of the people in the building were blown onto the roof of the neighboring building. And so when these people were filming the neighboring building, all you could really see at first was like a 3-year-old boy covered in blood on the other building, crying and like waving his hands towards the people filming him. In the background is the boy's father dead.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And then further across the roof is one of his sisters who was torn in half.
He was the only one that survived.
He and his mother.
Yeah.
He and his mother. So this BBC or Channel 4 News bit followed up with the mother and this child a couple weeks after, and he lost all 5 of his sisters, and the eldest of which I think was 13, and his father, whose lap he was sitting on when the missile struck, and he flew across to the other building.
The missile hit their 5th floor apartment on Al Yarmouk Street, Gaza City. The Israelis said they'd struck a Hamas terrorist and steps were taken to mitigate harm to civilians. Ali was sitting on his father's lap that afternoon. The force of the explosion threw him out of the flat onto the roof of a neighboring building, this roof.
في مدينة غزة كما تشاهدون هذا الطفل
We have blurred the remains of his father's body behind him. His name was Faraj. No one could reach Ali at first, so all he could do was wait. We've also obscured the dismembered body of one of his sisters. She was 2. Her name was Jury. She was one of Ali's 5 sisters, all of whom were killed. On the day of the strike, 15 bodies, all from the same extended family, were brought to the Al-Shifa morgue. Nuha was in the kitchen at the back of the apartment when the missile landed. She and Ali survived, no one else.
And so people were giving him, in his recovery, like one toy he got was a little stuffed toy of Superman, because they're like, oh, the boy who flies.
Yeah, it's like, and you'll see that, like you'll see like imagery come from Gaza of like strikes on apartment residential homes, like, and you'll see what looks to be like maybe debris like shooting up into the sky.
Yeah.
It's human bodies.
Yeah, you can see them.
And I find it like this is like a off year tier thing. I was just recently watching a documentary on like Netflix about 9/11 and when everyone was jumping out the windows.
Yeah.
And like what a horrific scene that was. And that was everywhere. Like the news was, it's still in a documentary that's came out, I think, this year. Like it's like such a fixated thing. But yet, so we're seeing this daily on our screens, human bodies shooting children, and people are like not reacting.
Yeah.
Like it is just like so insane to me, because of course still the imagery of it coming from anywhere is horrific, but it's like everybody deserves the same reaction. Like it's like what makes their life more valuable than this person's life.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
This was like so difficult. Like,
but this news report on this family, one thing, it went into the details of like, why were they targeted? And we were trying to get the Israelis to answer for this, because it was clearly a targeted attack.
Yeah.
But on this family.
Yeah.
And so they were like, oh, okay, what did the father do? Well, he worked at the Ministry of Finance. And his job at the Ministry of Finance, which like in Gaza, it's like Hamas was the governing authority. But, you know, you have different ministries. It's like you have bureaucrats.
They're the government there.
Yeah. And so
like you work for them.
Yeah. And so this guy, his job at the Ministry of Finance, he wasn't even really a bureaucrat. He was literally like a paper pusher. He would deliver items across the ministry. Like, deliver this package to this person on this floor or whatever. That was his job.
Yeah.
And apparently he had been twice arrested in the past by Israelis under, you know, suspicion of, I don't know, being a suspicious Palestinian, and then released twice.
Faraj was detained twice by the Israelis in the last 18 months. He was first arrested in December 2023, 2 months after the October the 7th attacks. According to his family, he was released 2 days later without charge, the assumption being that the Israelis didn't consider him to be a security threat. 3 months after that, he was detained again, along with hundreds of others, when the IDF raided the Al-Shifa hospital on the 18th of March. He spent 11 months in Ofer prison, was released on the 15th of February as part of an exchange of hundreds of Palestinian detainees for 3 Israeli hostages. We have asked the IDF why, after arresting and releasing him twice, they then decided to target him in an airstrike, and why they considered his young family to be an acceptable level of collateral damage. They did not give us an answer.
So they didn't have anything on him.
So interesting, like you're going to arrest them for the country that you're occupying because you are not liking their government that's in power, that was voted in the country you're occupying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
I'm just making sure we're all on the same page here.
correct. And then, but then he was arrested, under suspicion of blah,
course,
blah. But then twice released, which means that if the Israelis release you, it means they really didn't have shit.
Yeah, like they couldn't find shit.
They hold people
they're
without.
keeping kids. So,
yeah, like they keep people under. It's called administrative detention, which means that you don't. There's no. It's like without habeas corpus.
There's no like charge. Yeah.
Exactly. They arrest you like you are suspected of this, and you can be imprisoned for years without ever going to court or facing charges or meeting with a lawyer. So this guy was arrested and released twice, which means they had shit all, right? And yet they decided that in spite of this, in spite of him,
kill him.
We are going to kill him. And not only that, but he is such a valued target, apparently. This person, not even a bureaucrat. He's literally just a paper boy in a government bureaucracy.
Underpaid, like not even probably paid.
And that it was apparently worth killing his entire family in order to strike this high value target. I guess that's what they mean when they say Hamas command center. So brutal. Got a little ahead of ourselves there, but yes. So that is an example of kind of the chaos that's been unfolding since the ceasefire broke. At the same time, we've had the power neighboring countries, Egypt and Jordan, have been put in a very tight spot because Egypt and Jordan, incidentally, were the countries that Trump singled out, saying, when we expel the Palestinians from Gaza, they will go to Egypt and Jordan. We'll get them to take them.
Egypt and Jordan probably like, no.
Correct. That is what they immediately said when this was announced. So I think it's worth for our listeners to make a couple points. The first point is that unlike, say, for example, in Ukraine, when the war began and you saw refugees pouring across the borders into Poland and elsewhere and being welcomed, there's a different connotation and a different history when it comes to Palestine. And this reality is that since the 48 war at the founding of the State of Israel, when Palestinian refugees are pushed out of a territory, they never return. So they get pushed out of what became Israel proper. They were pushed into the West Bank and into Gaza. They were never permitted to go back to their homes and villages, which were there was about 600 of them that were all destroyed and wiped out. Then, the West Bank and Gaza were conquered in 1967. Another exodus, never permitted back in. So there is a fact that when Palestinians are expelled from territories, they are never permitted back.
No.
And then because the Palestinian issue is so central to the entire Arab world, Arab governments, such as Egypt and Jordan, cannot appear to support a plan of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, especially by taking them in. So there's a very different connotation. So it's like, while we may, like here in Canada or somewhere in the West, you may think of this idea of like, why won't they let these refugees in? That's so awful. And then blame them, because that was the original narrative that was taking place.
Yeah. But it's actually like, they're like, no, you are in the wrong. This is their homeland. They are not leaving. And if we were to accept it, we're traitorous to our own people. Exactly.
Yeah. And so they have serious concerns. And, they also have, they're not, Egypt and Jordan are not moved by moral considerations here.
No.
They're concerned fundamentally with regime stability. Mm-hmm. So these are both dictatorships. Jordan is far and away far more dependent upon the U.S. and foreign sources of funding. Like Jordan doesn't really have anything resource-wise. It's just a little kingdom that's been a very good ally, first of the British and then of the Americans.
Yeah.
And About 60% of Jordan's population are Palestinians,
Isn't
or
like the princess of Jordan like Palestinian or something?
the queen,
The queen, sorry, yeah.
Queen Noor of Jordan, yes, and so the king's wife, yeah.
Yeah, like I was like, she's Palestinian. Like I was
Yeah.
like, it's like,
Well, 60% of the population
Mhm.
are Palestinian, or the children of refugees of Palestinians, or
mhm.
Palestinians who have become naturalized citizens of Jordan,
Yeah.
and given Jordanian citizenship. But allowing a massive influx of, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians will create a lot of issues for regime
Oh
stability.
yeah.
First of all, there's been almost daily, weekly protests in Jordan against Israel and against this war. And so both Jordan and Egypt were the two first Arab governments to sign peace treaties with Israel. Egypt in 1979, Jordan in 1994. So that means that they're already in a precarious position with Israel,
Yeah.
because they're already allies of
Mhm.
Israel. And now Israel's committing a genocide and now turning it into an ethnic cleansing with
And
the
they're like,
US.
shit.
Yeah, and they're like, we cannot participate in this.
No, like
So,
leave us out.
yeah, Trump even threatened. He said, "Oh, we can cut off aid to these countries." So Jordan gets 1.7 billion annually in U.S. aid, mostly economic aid. Egypt gets 1.3 billion in military aid from the United States annually. The only country that gets more military aid
Yes.
from the United States every year is Israel.
Yes.
Egypt is number 2 in the world. But and the reason why they get that aid is because
Is
of the peace
the
agreement.
peace treaty. Yeah.
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 So they have these terms, but if you create a mass exodus, because Egypt is along the border of Gaza, the
Mhm.
Rafah border in the south that
Yeah.
goes into the Sinai, goes into Egypt.
Jordan's in the north.
In the east, yeah.
East, yeah.
Jordan is just east of the West Bank and east of Israel.
Yes.
So if you had a mass exodus out of Gaza into Egypt, the Egyptians already said, consider the treaty basically at an end. Egypt and Jordan are both also afraid not only of those political repercussions, but security repercussions, because they're like, well, with all the Palestinians would come, bless you, would come armed groups like Hamas
Yes.
and others,
Yes. Like,
and Egypt and Jordan also hate these groups.
yes. Yes.
Egypt, since the dictator orchestrated a coup back in 2013, El-Sisi is the dictator's name of
Yes.
Egypt, whom Trump has referred to on time and again as my favorite dictator. But yeah.
He's so brutal.
For
He's
our
so brutal.
For our non-viewers and just listeners, as I said that, Chelsey just literally let her head fall into her hands. But El-Sisi had basically launched his own anti-terror war in Egypt, in the Sinai, fighting like ISIS and other militant groups.
Yeah.
So he's been fighting militants. His coup was against the Muslim Brotherhood government.
Yes, and
Egypt.
there was like that huge there wasn't there like a massive protest when they were trying to get them out?
Yeah. And that was massive protest, but it was basically an organized coup.
Yes.
It was a big conspiracy. The New York Times actually reported on it.
Yes, like I remember like seeing it, because actually, like, randomly enough, like your sister was like in Egypt, wasn't she? Like,
not then. Egypt. It was years later.
Not then, yes. Years later. But like I remember being like, girl, like, haven't you seen some of the things that have gone down? Like, and your sister was just like willy-nilly rolling there. I was like, okay, girl.
Yeah, but that was that 2013 coup. It was like you had all these oligarchs holding back on gas and pulled the police off the streets. And
it was crazy.
They created an economic crisis, and they just basically undermined the government, and then the military stepped in during protests and said, we're removing you, and they called it a revolution. And then they crushed the protests, and then the government that they removed, the Muslim Brotherhood, tried to fight back, and then they killed like 1,000 protesters, the most protesters that have been killed since Tiananmen Square in '89 in China. The famous image of like the guy stepping out in front of the tank.
Yeah.
So it was a massive crackdown, and then Sisi has established a brutal dictatorship worse than that which preceded him. But he has also launched major war against militant Islamic groups in Egypt, in Sinai, also in neighboring countries like Libya.
Yeah.
And he's participated in those wars and in Yemen even. And
Because
there was one point.
He's like, isn't he like anti-Houthi?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I believe he was more aligned with the Saudis and the Emiratis.
Yeah, that's what
in
I
that
thought.
one.
Yeah.
And which is in Yemen.
Yeah.
And so it was
The one only country truly that's actually like done anything for Gaza
yeah.
and has the most to lose out other than Gaza. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, it's the poorest Arab
Yeah,
country.
it's so hard to watch.
And so and I believe it was in 2019 that the Egyptians even quietly asked for help from the Israelis to bomb some militant groups with airstrikes in the Sinai in Egypt. Not really reported widely. I think I saw like a New York Times article about it.
What's like, don't you remember seeing like that Israeli military boat going through the canal in Egypt? Like locals were like, what is this boat doing here? So they clearly, I feel like it's like with Egypt, the thing that I've at least noticed like through this thing, and obviously like you'll be like, yeah, that's the way it is. Like they are quite corrupt. Like they're just willing to, like, they want their money, they want their funding, and they're like going to turn a blind eye until it doesn't work in their favor. Like you were saying, like for the regime, like it's going to have to take the people to rise up.
Well, yeah. And that's, I mean, that's what's rocked Egyptian politics since 2011, the threat of a popular uprising. So the dictatorship does everything it can to prevent that from happening. But yes, the Egyptians it's a brutal dictatorship. And even before Sisi, you had Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood leader. And then before that, you had, it was just like a military junta for, I think it was like 8 months or 12 months. And then before that was Hosni Mubarak for about 30 years.
Yeah.
But during that time, Egypt was and remains Israel's top partner for managing the blockade and siege of Gaza. They could not have done it without Egypt because Egypt is the one country
literally
that has a border with Gaza that isn't Israel.
Yeah, like they could have done something.
Yeah, so they cooperated and worked with Israel to manage the siege and blockade, and always have. So,
which is so disgusting.
Yeah, so Egypt is already in a precarious enough position as far as its reputation goes, internally with its own population and in the wider world. So it has security concerns from the population of Gaza, like we don't want any more potential militants. Then it has the wider political concerns with, if we help ethnically cleanse Palestine, even Gaza, even by taking in the Palestinians, so that America can
make it
hotels,
into a beach
resort. Then basically the population of Egypt, which is the most populous Arab country, would rise up, and like Sisi probably couldn't even rely on the military to keep him in power at that point. And then over in Jordan, the King Abdullah II, he like, if he brought in a bunch of people from Gaza, if he brought in a ton of people from Gaza, like, not only does he have the security concern, which incidentally just last week he banned the Muslim Brotherhood because he's so afraid of everything, but politically it would collapse. Like, there would be a revolution. And they don't have the kind of military that Egypt has to keep him in power. He'd be finished. So both these guys, while they get a lot of aid from the Americans, no amount of aid can make up for the fact that, well, if we do what you say, we get overthrown.
Yeah.
Maybe our militaries take us out. Maybe our populations fully rise up and kill us and throw us out. But either way, like, we're
dead.
Yeah, if we if we do what you say and adhere to this crazy Trump plan for Gaza, then we're finished. And no amount of threats of, well, we'll withdraw aid is going to cut it, because they're threatened if they withdraw aid, but it's not a guaranteed regime
Yeah.
collapse.
Yeah.
It could in time threaten them, but the thing is that
It's like longer time though.
exactly when you weigh those
Finding time.
realities,
Yeah.
And then if you lose aid from, like, at least economic aid from the Americans, there's always the Saudis who will just step in and be like, here's 12 billion.
Yeah.
Which is how Egypt got away with its coup in the first place, because the Americans back in 2013, they tried to stop the coup for a brief moment and have a democratic government restored. And so they suspended the US military aid to Egypt. And then the Saudis were literally like, here is $12 billion, Egypt. Keep doing what you're doing. So the American leverage was just gone.
Yeah. So it's like,
And,
I feel like, and it's like, because wouldn't there be like any like hate towards like Saudi and Qatar and like these other places as well? Like, it's like the people could rise up there as well.
I mean, yes and no. So yes, in the sense that they are always perpetually worried about that. Every Arab dictator is perpetually worried about their own populations.
Yeah.
However, the Saudis more so, because they do have, I think about, this is off the top of my head, so don't quote me on this, but I want to say like 20 million, maybe maximum 30 million, but that sounds way too high for me. Let's say, okay, I'm actually just going to look this up. Population of Saudi Arabia. Sorry, I don't like looking things up when I'm doing podcasts because you just hear that typing sound.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. 33 million. Okay.
Oh, pretty big. You were pretty close.
I was close. Yeah. It's really close to Canada. However, Saudi citizens, when you break it down, are about 18 million. The rest are like foreign workers.
Yeah.
Largely from South Asian countries, where they come and do all the construction projects and work all the service and construction jobs in Saudi Arabia and have their passports stolen. Basically like slave labor. So Saudi Arabia, big population. Now, Gilf, Chelsey, Google the population of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates.
10.4 million.
Okay, now is there a section of that where it can expand it to show you how many of those are actually citizens of the UAE? Like, are Emirati citizens?
So there says Emirati citizens. No, it doesn't.
Okay, well, let me just... Okay, so 10 million UAE. What percent of UAE population is Emirati? About 10%.
Okay, yeah, now I see that. 10%.
So you have about 1.3 million actual Emiratis, and the rest are foreigners.
Foreigners. And that's kind of, there's a high percentage of that too, like in, that's crazy.
And now go to Qatar. This is the third big one. So 2.6 million. And then how many citizens are Qatari? Like 360,000.
That's crazy.
Right. Okay. So you look at, so obviously the Saudis have a significant population, relatively speaking. So they have legit concerns. But
whoa. They're only like 0.36 million of their people. They're the lowest population.
Qatar?
Qatar, yeah.
Yeah. Well, look at Kuwait. I think they're even smaller.
That's crazy.
How many in Kuwait?
Actually, it's 1.53 of the 4.82 million.
Oh, okay.
From there, more. So it's actually in Qatar.
Qatar, yeah, that's the that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, I hear all of them, to be honest.
Yeah.
Now, so these are those Gulf monarchies, with the exception of the Saudis.
Yeah.
Are very small. If you look at a country like Egypt, the population is about 115 million.
Yeah, it's so massive.
And so that's a very different thing. Jordan, I want to say, has like probably 6 million. Oh wow, okay, more than I thought. And half of them are Palestinians.
Yes, like, and that's what I've seen.
Yeah. So
and Lebanon is only 5.7.
Yeah.
So very small, yeah. So it's like Egypt carries the weight, eh? Like it's like the big.
That's why Egypt has always been the most important Arab country.
Yeah.
politically speaking.
And it makes sense that it can have like the biggest overthrow like internally because of the
It also
size
has the
of
biggest
people.
army.
Yes. Yeah.
And so Egypt is historically known as the most important Arab nation.
Yeah.
It's less true than it used to be. The Saudis have become very, very important because of their wealth.
Their wealth, yeah.
And so have Qatar, and so have the UAE.
I would say, like they like all of a sudden I feel like are a lot more prominent.
They're and that's mostly this century.
Yeah.
So the
I
past
remember growing up, like when we were growing up, it was like I was learning about like Egypt, and it was always like you would hear about these other places, but Egypt was always like the main focal point.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it was just like boom, like UAE, like all these ones started to become like these big players.
Yeah, well, it's all the oil boom.
The oil boom, right?
And the gas boom that brought all this massive amounts of money into these countries, which they then invested in America, in the West. And so it created this whole cycle. This actually goes back to the 70s, and my favorite movie ever, 1976, Network, deals with this subject directly and actually predicts basically the future of the global economy over the next 50 years.
Oh my gosh, I want to watch that.
It's a great movie.
It's called Network?
Network, yeah. 1976. Best script ever written. Best performance ever from Faye Dunaway. And it's brilliant.
Yeah.
I
made a goal to not obviously do as many movies as you do. So this is obviously, but I'm going to try to start going back once a month.
Oh, nice.
Because I was like, you know what? I want to do that.
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's important.
That's a sit down and pay attention one. That's not.
Yes, no. I even just mean in general. Just I stopped watching movies as much as I used to, and then lately now I'm trying to be like documentaries, like anything, because everything's so inundated to us now through our phones.
Yeah.
And it's like I need to remove myself from some of that sometimes.
Totally.
Yeah.
But okay, so getting back to your point about these Gulf monarchies being concerned of their populations, they are concerned of their populations, but their concerns are less so than, say, Jordan and Egypt.
Yes, no, and that makes sense. Yeah.
The Saudis, their concerns are legit in that respect, but they have a lot more money to throw around, and so they can throw money when the Arab Spring hit in 2011. The Saudis were so afraid that what they did is that they just started funding massive amounts of social programs in Saudi Arabia. So they just threw money at the population and were like, we're going to preempt any protests by just drowning people in money so that they don't complain about the politics. And it largely worked. But then they financed the counter-revolution in Egypt and elsewhere. They financed proxy wars in Libya and Yemen, in Syria. And they paid huge amounts of money to Jordan so that it could remain stable, and because Jordan doesn't have really sources of income, but it had major protests during the Arab Spring, and everybody was freaked out about that because nobody wanted to lose Jordan. You don't want to lose a monarchy, right? It's one thing for a dictator to go, another for a monarch.
So that's interesting though, right? Because that kind of plays into like that situation again, right? Like, so it's like if Jordan was to go or Egypt was to go, that's problematic for Saudi.
Yes, and so they're going to be throwing more money at it. If it gets to that position. But that's why if they lose the American leverage, the Saudis will step in.
The Saudis will step in.
With economic aid. But the Saudis can't step in with the military aid, because where do the Saudis get their military support? They buy it from the Americans.
Classic.
So if the Americans cut them off, such as, heavy is the crown for the empire. So these states have legit concerns, stability concerns, if they follow through with these plans. So instead of adhering to the Trump plan, they were trying to organize. And in fact, the countries that we all mentioned got together and were trying to come up with an alternative plan for what to do with Gaza post-war. So it was Egypt in the driver's seat, with Jordan, with the Saudis, with the Emiratis, and with the Qataris. So these 5 Arab states got together, were trying to come up with an alternative plan. Then they were joined by the Europeans. So you had the British, the Germans, the French, and the Italians. So all these countries got together. Their foreign ministers were meeting over
colonials.
They were trying to come up with a plan of what is an alternative plan that we can present to Trump that he'll be like, okay, that'll work. Like basically what the Americans were saying was, oh, if you have an alternative to our plan,
we're open to it.
Yeah, if you have something better, then put it on the table. So they put forward their plan. It was the Arab summit approved it, so all the Arab states approved it. The Europeans pushed it, and they announced it just days before the end of the ceasefire. And the plan was basically, it wasn't anything that we haven't heard before. It was basically that the Arab states would fund the rebuilding of Gaza without displacing the Palestinians from Gaza. And that they would have basically an interim security force to meet Israel's security needs, so that there wouldn't be
probably be less brutal.
Well, so that there wouldn't be an Israeli military occupation of Gaza. But that would have to be probably Arab security forces from Arab states. So then they would have to become the occupiers of Gaza. They also had a plan for a temporary government of Palestinian technocrats, not affiliated with Hamas or any other faction, to run Gaza.
Did that happen in like South Africa one time? That was like brought forward or something like that? Technocrats. I feel like I've heard that term before.
Not in South Africa, but I've talked a lot about technocrats. But I don't want to get off track. But technocrat is basically just rule by experts.
Yes.
It's just like apolitical, like our new prime minister, Mark Carney. He was a technocrat. He was a central banker. He was an unelected technical expert economist, blah blah blah, in a technocratic position for his whole career. He's new to being a politician, right? And new to democracy. Technocracy is not democracy.
No.
So the Egyptians were pushing this plan for, a temporary government of technocrats, and then eventually the Palestinian Authority, which governs parts of the West Bank, would then come in and take over the administration of a rebuilt Gaza. This is the general outlines of the plan. Yeah. And despised by
they're so terrible.
The Palestinian Authority are despised even more than Hamas.
Just like Israel. It's like Israel wearing a PA.
Correct. The Palestinian Authority are generally viewed by the Palestinians as, and described as, the
enemies,
as Israel's subcontractor in the occupation, which is in effect what they are. So the idea would be to have them eventually
now
come
move
over
into Gaza
to retake Gaza. Yes.
Because they lost to Hamas.
Correct. Back in 2005, 2006.
And bring back the party that the people hated. It's like, here we go. Not include them or ask them what they want or need. Let's make the decisions for them. This always works.
Except that Israel,
of course,
hates the Palestinian Authority, doesn't even want it to exist in the West Bank, and flat out rejects the Palestinian Authority to have any role in post-war Gaza. So that's a non-starter. Israel also it rejects basically every part of the Arab plan,
because it doesn't result in them taking them over. It doesn't result in them having it.
Exactly. So that's a non-starter. And also the Trump administration immediately rejected the Arab plan when it was presented.
I remember seeing that.
So all that for nothing. Essentially. They couldn't come up with a true plan. And so when it came time for the end of the ceasefire on March 18th, that's when Israel relaunched the war in what Netanyahu called fighting with force, and killed 400 people that day, 130 children.
So crazy.
The next day, the defense minister, Israel Katz, declared that they could undertake the complete destruction of Gaza. The IDF chief, the new chief of staff of the IDF, another extremist who was even worse than his predecessor, declared that 2025 will be a year of war, as if 2024 and 2023 weren't. Yeah,
it's been years of war. It's not like it's been years, decades of war.
Correct. And as the days went on, Defense Minister Katz began, and for those listening, that's Katz, not
The name's
kitty,
terrible.
not kitty cats.
No.
But he began threatening that we're going to take territory and we're going to hold it. So the new plan is not like the old plan where you go, like the Israeli forces would go in, conquer an area, then leave, and then Hamas would regroup and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
This time the plan is we go in, hold the territory, and keep going and expand. And then the new plan is to push all the Palestinians into an even smaller, tiny little enclave just on the coast.
I've seen that. It's literally
just
like
on the coast of the Mediterranean. Yeah, tiny little spot, and just down south towards the border with Egypt.
Yeah.
So a very small territory, a sliver of a sliver.
Yeah.
This is already one of the most, if not the most densely populated.
It's like it's insane the place where they want to place them. It's like a corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and we all know what their plan is. It's like now we're going to herd them even further down, and then the next thing is out into the desert you go, which is what they've always been planning.
Push them out into the sea,
the sea, like where they already have it, like netted off. And if you go past that net, it's just straight shoot. Like it's like you're not even allowed to go catch fish out there and eat.
No. Since the ceasefire has ended.
No, I know they're not allowed out there.
They're not allowed to go fishing. All their boats have been bombed and destroyed. They've been now having to eat turtles that come close to shore, and the water is all polluted now because there's no refuse collection. There's no all the drainage.
The sea line along there is going to be so toxic and destroyed.
It's actually filled with hospital runoff currently,
and that's,
because everything's been destroyed.
That will go so coastline further along.
Oh yeah,
and you know what? It's going to be. I'm going to save my words because there's an area it's going to hit where people like to vacation and they're just swamping around in that and they don't even care.
Yeah. So and then Netanyahu began threatening that we're going to hold territory and take territory. They were started to issue more evacuation orders from every side. They within weeks basically controlled 70% of Gaza. We're continuing to manage this brutal siege, blockade, just unending starvation, to the point where this past week you had UN and top watchdog agents, like the number one agency in the world for monitoring hunger, issued a really stark warning. I think it was this week, warning that the entire population of Gaza, I think it was actually like 93.7% of the population of Gaza is at a critical situation in terms of famine. They're at the critical point of famine, and that 20% of Gazans were currently officially starving, and that you had, I think it was 70,000 children who all 900,000 children at risk of famine, and then 70,000 children who are basically at acute risk of dying from malnutrition, like in the immediate near term.
It's disgusting.
Yeah. And in this time, incidentally, Israel's been bombing hospitals.
Yep.
All the bakeries had to shut down. They ended their program for working with aid agencies.
Yes.
And humanitarian aid. So what would happen? So there was like groups like World Central Kitchen and other, food and aid agencies. They would coordinate with the IDF, the Israelis, because they'd say, we're taking a delivery to this bakery at this spot. And they would chart out their route and they would coordinate it with the Israelis so that where we're going and you don't target us, what our vehicles are. And of course, the Israelis every once in a while would decide, we're going to kill some aid workers today. Just like they did with the World Central Kitchen the previous April in 2024, where they bombed them 3 cars in a row. But they decided, the Israelis just said, we're no longer doing this coordination system. So a lot of aid agencies were like, well, we can't operate here with that. It's too unsafe for our workers, and we can't do that. It's too unsafe. So they basically had to stop their deliveries, even for those that were already inside the territory. And then the Israelis announced that, oh, they have a new plan for how aid gets delivered. It's no longer through aid agencies. It's no longer through the charities. It's no longer through all the organizations that actually do this, and that's what their whole purpose and function and practice, and they have decades of experience. Instead, we're going to either do it through the military or through private security contractors that we hire. And they set out their plan for how they're going to manage this aid distribution. And all the aid agencies looked at the plan. The UN looked at the plan and said, the aid agencies called it cruel. And the UN said, this is unworkable. And everybody who looked at the plans, even the Europeans, were like, this is inhumane. And the plan was basically, we will deliver aid, but only in one spot, which happens to be that little corridor where they want all the Palestinians to go to. So they will only deliver aid in the place where they are trying to corral. Yeah, exactly. So for all the Palestinians everywhere else, best of luck. You're going to starve. No aid for you. And so it also means that as they do this, they control who gets access to the aid, because you have to go through Israeli checkpoints to get to those corridors and those places that they deem safe.
It's endless.
Yeah, so it's just cruelty upon cruelty upon cruelty. And all this time, incidentally, the Israelis are also bombing parts of Syria, bombing parts of Lebanon, bombing Yemen, and meanwhile
Gaza.
Exactly. And then the Trump administration appeared to reach a point of frustration with the Israelis, it seems, where Trump made a deal with the Houthis in Yemen to stop the bombing campaign. Incidentally, the United States, because the Trump administration started a bombing campaign actually mid-March, just a few days before Israel ended its ceasefire in Gaza. And in the span of about a month and a half, the Trump administration bombed about 800 targets in Yemen. It was huge. To the point where you had top generals in the Pentagon concerned about how fast they were going through munitions, because they were worried that they were going to have to bring munitions over from the Asia Pacific theater, which means that a lot of US military installations that are currently supposed to be protecting Taiwan would have to have a lot of their stores emptied out to send to go kill people in the poorest country.
Yeah, because this is what you need to be doing right now. Like, my God.
And
for our listeners, wasn't this the one where the WhatsApp chat got released?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
The signal gate
over
bombing Yemen.
Good old America.
And
he was probably hitting the whiskey a little too hard that night.
Oh, Pete Hegseth? Yeah, I think he hits the whiskey for
on TV.
Yeah.
He's just drinking while he's at work.
Instead of his morning coffee.
Jeez, man.
It's just a vodka enema. So and then the biggest attack that the Americans made on Yemen was an attack that ended up hitting a missile strike that ended up hitting a migrant detention center, killing about 68 African migrants who were being held in that place. So that was nice of them.
Yeah.
And so the Americans made a deal with the Houthis. No more attacks. The Houthis said they won't attack international shipping. They'll only target Israeli ships. And the Americans said, okay, we won't target you anymore. And then the IDF announced, they put out a list. They announced that they are downgrading in terms of their war aims. Returning hostages, getting hostages returned, is at the bottom of their list of priorities. It used to be like number one. Now it is at the bottom of the list. So
why are Israelis like up in arms about this?
They are increasingly.
So it's like do more about it. Like,
yeah, well, if you look at the Israeli polls now, about 60% are opposed to the war continuing.
Yeah, I mean, I do, and I see the protests picking up, and
there are increased protests.
I do see it, but it's like
still minorities in the protests, but more than previous. And so, yeah, the IDF changed its priorities. So now number one is defeating Hamas, then operational control of territory, demilitarization of the territory, destroying Hamas's rule all over the territory, concentration and movement of the population, and then at the very end, return hostages as an afterthought. And
It's like
so
demilitarize it. It's like you plan on just like demilitarizing yourselves, or
well, that's
just
always
you
the
guys
irony,
in there.
right?
It's just like
That's why Israeli language, there's nothing more Orwellian than Israeli language to
like
describe
it's like
what
when
it
they
does.
like when they're talking about the things that they do, it's like you're referencing yourself.
Yes.
Sometimes Trump does that too, or I'm like,
Yeah.
but you're referencing you.
Yeah.
Like it's like, God.
Like when he called the previous NAFTA agreement the worst agreement, and it's like, buddy,
You
you
did that.
negotiated, you signed it.
Yes, he's so brutal.
Yeah, it's
He's
insane.
like, worst deal ever. Whoever needed this deal. It's like, dude, that was you, man.
Yeah, you're the
And
idiot.
when you made it, you said it was the best deal ever.
Yeah.
Can't with these people,
So
man.
when so the demilitarization, what Israel means by that is that basically Hamas would have to be demilitarized.
Yes, yeah.
Obviously, Israel would get to
We'll still be
hyper
going.
militarize.
Yeah, it's like we're gonna ramp it up.
Yes, and that's the same demand they make in Syria. So when the Assad regime collapsed in November, December,
That's their next one.
Yeah, last year, and you got a new regime in power.
Yeah.
Actually run by Ahmed al-Shara, who's a former ISIS and Al-Qaeda figure,
like,
turned quote unquote moderate. TBD,
like,
we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see.
We'll see. Like we will see. Like
Yeah.
he like when I like found out who he was, I was like, what?
Oh,
like
shit.
and then he's like, morally, I don't really align with you. I'm more over here. I like to just be extreme in my own country.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
So when that happened, first of all, the Israelis bombed about 1,000 targets across the country when the regime collapsed.
Yes, I remember.
They
that.
destroyed basically all of Syria's military.
Yeah,
all
they
their
bombed their
installations.
naval, like all their
their
ships.
navy's totally gone.
Yeah, gone, sunk it. It's like,
Yeah.
and if someone else did that, like if that, like, could you imagine if like Trump was just like, let's just like
Anybody.
sink all of Canada's like military? People would be like, what the hell?
Yeah. And Israel's
like,
just like, we're just doing this
Syria
preemptively
again.
because, we don't trust them.
Yeah. We don't
and-
trust you. No
Yeah.
one trusts you.
Yeah,
Like, you
well.
are the herpy of the Middle East. You're just spreading about. Like, someone get this guy a medication and they need it lifelong so that it just goes
Somebody
right
put this guy into a coma.
back in.
But the Israelis also, because they've already since 1967 occupied a part of Syria called the Golan Heights,
Yes,
part of the Golan Heights, and then they immediately expanded and stole a lot more territory in Syria, including like seizing territory that's up to near Damascus, the capital, and also I believe the most ancient city on earth. Like older than Jerusalem.
Oh, really? Jerusalem? Holy.
Oh yeah, much older than Jerusalem apparently. Damascus is, I think it's older than Baghdad.
Crazy.
I think it might be the oldest city on earth. And so they expanded their territory. Then they started militarizing that territory, and every once in a while bombing other targets in Syria. And when fighting would flare up between different sects in Syria, the Israelis would start bombing, and they bombed near the presidential palace as a warning. And Netanyahu said, you don't come to the south. The south must be demilitarized. Southern Syria is demilitarized, which again, very specific meaning, which means
by
that
Syrian government.
Correct. The Syrians are not allowed to deploy military forces to the south.
In their own country.
Correct. While the Israelis, meanwhile, were expanding their military presence and militarizing. So
makes no sense.
Yeah, when the Israelis say this needs to be demilitarized, it means that other people have to do what they say, but they are actually accelerating the militarization.
We're invading you, and you're going to accept it.
Correct.
They're psychotic.
It just reminds me, there is Orwell, who wrote 1984. I'm trying to find the quote. Right. Okay. One of the famous quotes from George Orwell's 1984. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. That was like the mantra of the regime
Yeah.
in 1984. That is Israel. You know, war is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. You know, it's when you turn words inside
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
There's
He's the like Israel's the king of that.
absolutely. And if you just give me one moment, I want to find. Okay, yeah, here we go. It's a piece that Orwell wrote about 2 years before he wrote 1984. He wrote an essay called Politics and the English Language. And there's a little bit here that I want to find and read. Okay, here we go. This was written 1946, I want to say. So after World War II.
Yeah.
And at the start of the Cold War. Orwell writes, bear with me, it's worth it, but it's a little lengthy.
Okay.
In our time, political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. Things like the continuance of British rule in India, the Russian purges and deportations, the dropping of the atom bombs on Japan can indeed be defended, but only by arguments which are too brutal for most people to face and which do not square with the professed aims of political parties. Thus, political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. Defenseless villages are bombarded from the air, the inhabitants driven out into the countryside, the cattle machine gunned, the huts set on fire with incendiary bullets. This is called pacification. Millions of peasants are robbed of their farms and sent trudging along the roads with no more than they can carry. This is called transfer of population or rectification of frontiers. Does this sound familiar?
Yes.
People are imprisoned for years without trial, or shot in the back of the neck, or sent to die of scurvy in Arctic lumber camps. This is called elimination of unreliable elements. Such phraseology is needed if one wants to name things without calling up mental pictures of them. And then I just want to find my favorite. Here we go. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. Orwell at his best.
Yeah.
And I'll just repeat that last bit. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. I think Orwell's description of the euphemism and of those terms of like pacification, because that's what we see in Gaza.
Yeah.
You know, when you see this mass destruction and this mass murder, and the response is, well, the Israelis don't call it pacification specifically, but essentially, but describing their operations, how they describe how, oh, they're the most moral army in the world, committing some of the most immoral acts that we've ever witnessed.
Mm-hmm.
This is such a genocidal war that word is now really being embraced. Like the UN officials started saying that.
Yeah.
Not special rapporteurs, which are different and have been saying that for a while, but top UN officials are now using that term. Amnesty International embraced the term like in the fall. So did Human Rights Watch. They keep reiterating it.
Yeah.
And in light of the recent extreme siege, no food, no water, no electricity, no nothing, no fuel, everybody like Amnesty and other human rights groups were reiterating this is clearly genocidal. This is just further evidence of the genocidal intent. And so we are still waiting, as of this recording, May 14th. Israel has announced that they are preparing for a massive ground invasion of Gaza, and that they're really going to head for the intense phase.
Yeah. Which is
because I
like,
guess
what do you mean? It's already
Yeah,
been intense.
exactly.
It's like, so what does this mean?
Exactly. They claim that they are waiting for Trump to leave the region because Trump is
Trump's there
currently
right
on
now.
his Middle East tour, where he's being bribed by the Qataris with a $400 million plane.
Disturbing. And he's like, it's such a nice plane. Why wouldn't I accept it? It's like, 'cause you're
Exactly.
the president, and this is illegal.
Yeah.
We were
Not according
rattled
to
when
his criminal
Trudeau took a
attorney.
trip to Jamaica. Like, it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's all pretty wild.
Like, Hillary sent some emails. Do we remember?
Well, okay, actually, one thing, the Clinton Foundation got hundreds of millions of dollars in donations from the Saudis, the
Oh, yeah.
Qataris,
Like, there's like,
and the
don't get me wrong,
Emiratis.
they're disgusting. Like, the Clintons are awful, man. Like,
Yeah.
but it's just like the things that Trump focused on. It's like just so like that. It goes back to like what we were just kind of talking about. Like, he is also just like Netanyahu in Israel. Like, the things he says make no sense because you're doing that.
Yeah.
Like, it's insane. It's like
Yeah.
when he tries to like get on the stage and say he's like fighting for the rights of like children and women. Well, he like actively takes apart like any form of care,
Healthcare
or help,
and education,
or anything.
and
Like, next thing I know, like
benefits.
literally, it's like, what?
Yeah. Well, that's the Orwellian thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you do the opposite. So
Of what
in
you say,
1984, doublespeak
Yeah.
is, you know, like you're saying one thing, but the meaning is the complete opposite, and you're doing the opposite. Doublethink is holding two simultaneously opposing ideas in your head at the same time and believing them both.
Yes.
So, like, that for me is like having a conversation with an Israeli.
Literally.
You
I
know?
actually literally just ordered 1984 while you were talking.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I was like, oh my god, fuck, I forgot about that book. Like, I gotta get
It's
it.
great
I gotta
book.
read it. It's
Great
so
book.
good. And such a good climate to read it in right now. Like, it would be
Oh my
like,
god,
so good. Yeah.
it's gonna be like you're like, I thought this was supposed to be fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, the and Orwell, incidentally, whose real name was Eric Blair, studied under Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. And if you go, and so Huxley wrote that in the 30s, and then if you go, there were these series of lectures in the 1960s, early 1960s, called Brave New World Revisited. There was an essay and then a series of lectures by Aldous Huxley, and he talks about how far along things have gone towards realizing what his dystopian vision in Brave New World that he talked about. And it's shocking that 30 years later, in the 1960s, and this is now like 60 plus years ago, how advanced his vision was already at that time.
Oh my god.
And then you kind of come into today, and we're more like a meshing of 1984 and Brave New World.
It's frightening. It's frightening where the world is heading.
Truly. And so we have now Trump in the Middle East getting all these official bribes from his from these rich Arab dictators who are treating him like the king that he always wants to be. So Trump is getting literally the royal treatment. The Saudi murderous Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS,
He's the worst.
Even had a mobile McDonald's van brought for Trump. Yeah.
Just go in the distance for the orange man. Get him some Mickey D's so he feels at home.
Exactly.
God forbid he, I don't know, eats food of culture.
Yeah. And so we're waiting. This podcast is, recorded at a very opportune moment because we don't know. There's so many rumors in the press right now that Trump may, because right as he arrived, the U.S. negotiated a deal with Hamas directly to release the last American hostage. And this was done without Israel's knowledge, and he was released. And for Hamas's side, they said, as a goodwill gesture to Trump. Hamas desperately wants a ceasefire, and they want the Americans to force it on the Israelis.
Yeah.
The U.S. has now negotiated with Hamas directly without the Israelis for a hostage release. The top U.S. envoy to the region, Steve Witkoff, met with the hostage families, got on the phone with Hamas, put them on the phone with their relative, then got him released, and said publicly that the Israeli government, Netanyahu, does not want to end the war. They're just trying to keep it going.
Yeah.
And this is from the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Right. And
but it's like,
so,
but do something about it then, because you guys could do something. So
yes.
I feel like
And
they say shit all day. It doesn't mean anything.
Correct, but we might see a bit of a turn here. That's the whole thing, right?
Yeah,
we're waiting because we don't know what's being said.
I just don't trust them though, because it's like they got what they wanted, right? You know, so it's like Trump is so unpredictable.
Yeah, like of course you can't trust these people, but you have to like, which way is this going to go? Which ways, you know, the court are going to fall here? But because you know, there was that negotiation without the Israelis. There was the negotiation with the Houthis without the Israelis. And there are simultaneous negotiations taking place with the Iranians over an Iranian nuclear deal with the Americans. And the Israelis have been sidelined out of all three of these things. Now, if you read the Israeli press, if you read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, talking about, all of whom have very good access to the Israeli establishment, Israel is freaking out. They are panicking. Like among the Israeli officials, they are panicked. They have never been so left out. Like not under Obama, not under any, like have they been so left out of decision-making processes in the region and to do with like at least related to them in some way. Like in the very least,
how does that feel? Like it's like you guys do that to everybody. So
well, in the very least, presidents would always give the Israelis a heads up. Like they don't need their permission.
Even deserve it. They deserve nothing.
Well, true. So there is an indication that maybe, because we had reporting that Trump has cut off Bibi, Netanyahu has cut off contact with him.
Yeah, I heard he's not going to see him on this tour.
Oh no, they are not going to Israel. But this tour is about getting bribes and getting money.
But it's like
neither of which Israel has to offer.
Yeah, like don't you think you would try to see them while they're in the middle of a war and you're trying to like make deals?
Trump's priorities are what can I get out of it? There's
that's why I'm like, I don't know. I feel like still very like, I don't know. I feel like I have to see like what will happen here.
100%. Yeah. But there's clearly like a rift. Whether or not it turns out to be more theatrical than reality based, we'll see. But right now it seems that the Israelis are freaked out. Yeah. Because the fact is that if they lose US support, they lose. Yeah. They cannot continue without it. So the Americans seem to be putting some pressure. I think Trump wants a deal, of course, because that's his whole thing.
Yeah, he loves a deal. The art of a deal.
Exactly. But, you know, that's a big to be determined as to whether or not the Israelis will do what he wants, because if Netanyahu stops this war, Smotrich is going to resign. Incidentally, Ben-Gvir came back into the cabinet when the war restarted. So if Netanyahu ends the war, then Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are going to leave the cabinet. The government is going to go into crisis, and Netanyahu, his government is going to collapse. So much like how we described the interests of the Jordanian and Egyptian regimes with the threats from the U.S. of potential aid cutoffs, we also have to recognize, yes, the Americans can have a lot of threats to the Israelis and a lot of leverage, but at the end of the day, if Netanyahu ends the war, he probably ends his political career and maybe goes to prison.
Yeah.
So
many options.
So it may mean that the Israelis will just continue without the Americans and become a real pariah rogue state. And
yeah, like that's what I feel like that's like they're not going to stop. Like, right? Like it's like the US would have to physically stop them.
Yeah, I think the Israelis, and they love to create what's always called facts on the ground. So I think it seems like the moment that Trump gets back from the Middle East and from all his official bribes, then the Israelis are going to launch their invasion. They've been calling up tens of thousands of reservists. Incidentally, inside Israel, there is a growing protest movements, including thousands of reservists signing letters saying they will refuse to show up for duty and refuse to report and participate in the war. And there's even a growing cohort of protesters and Israelis who are actually opposed to like what we are morally opposed to, and recognize that the loss of life in Gaza of Palestinians, that this in itself is criminal, because most of the opposition to the war is like, what are the war aims? How does this help the hostages? Our economy is destroyed. It's still all very Israeli focused.
I do see a lot of like the younger generation like refusing to join the IDF, like, and being like, I'm not going to do that. Like, and
very few
themselves.
refuse to join.
Yeah. I see it quite a few like interviews of younger men refusing to join.
Honestly, there's been like 5.
That's still impressive.
Yeah.
If there was a draft and we were going to be imprisoned, I don't think you're going to be seeing more than 10 or 11 people.
No,
refusing.
you'd see hundreds. Like,
I don't know.
Honestly, like Vietnam in the 60s, there was a draft, and you had like, that's what the whole phenomenon of draft dodgers. They all came to Canada.
Yeah. But I think the draft of what's going on then and what they do to them there in Russia is very different. Like in Russia and like in Israel, it's forced upon like consistently all the time. Like you have to serve for an X amount of years when you.
Yeah, there's conscription, but
that's not active here. Like if it was though consistently, I think you would see less people. Like if that was going on all the time. Not just like a one-time draft. Like if Canada all of a sudden was like, yo, every male in this country has to serve at the age of 18, you would see over time less and less people declining because you'd go to jail.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually the opposite usually, is that over time more and more people will not show up and decline. That's what happened in Ukraine, right? For them, then. Well, it is.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And you were saying not that many.
No. Okay, there's a difference between people who are saying that they're refusing to their call up for the reserves versus somebody who refuses to serve in the IDF altogether. Like you're talking about like refuseniks, which is what the Israelis called them back in like the early 2000s, I think, where it's like, because you have to do a national service in Israel if you're not Haredi or Orthodox, you have to do, it's like, so it doesn't necessarily mean the IDF, though it's mostly the IDF, but there's other forms of societal service that they can do. But in terms of like, that means that they absolutely refuse to join the IDF at all. But reservists being called up means they're already in the reserves. They've already done their 2 years of service, and they're part of the reserve element, which means that they can be called up at a given time. And what's happening is that now they're being called up and now they're refusing. So it's not the initial service that they refuse. Yeah. They're refusing being called up again as reservists. So it is slightly different.
Yeah.
But then what you're talking about, like Ukraine, because when that war started, it was martial law and all men have to stay and can't leave. But increasingly over time, more and more leave and escape and stuff. So, and just like in America with the drafting.
No, I know. I was saying though, like in general, like if a country, like in Russia is what I was referring to, not the Ukraine. Like Russia does make them serve. Like they are required to serve a certain amount of time in their military when they turn a certain age.
I don't know that about Russia, actually. I mean, obviously now with the war, it's all like,
because I met a
forced
man who left so that he wouldn't have to do that. Like who?
Yeah, but that's since the war, right?
Nope, before the war. Like maybe it was like after 2013, like when they first invaded, like the Ukraine. But I was working in a law firm and I was dating Braden, so like in the last like 8 years.
I don't know.
He was like married to a girl, and he was like, "Yeah, I left because I don't want to have to serve. Like, I didn't want to have to do that." So I was like, "Oh, that's crazy."
Well, there you go.
But I just think that's like if they were to do that like across the board, I think you would see like it would be like when they like it's crazy. Like imagine if Canada was just like, "Yeah, you all have to serve, and if you don't, like 2 years in prison." It'd be like that's wild. Like, so I think it's impressive that some of them are starting to be like, "I'm not going to do that."
Oh yeah,
like,
for sure.
Because it's like it's not like you're just gonna get a slap on the wrist. Like you're going to jail. Like, and I think they go for like a year or something like that. If they
I think so.
Decline. Yeah, and then they're made to go again the next year. And if they decline again, then they go back to jail. Like it's like crazy.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean, better than go to Gaza and kill children.
Exactly. But it's just like that's how out of like you can't even get people to like volunteer to be in your military. Like you're making them. Like, You know, that just speaks volumes about.
Well, I mean,
country.
it's also a very small country.
No, for sure.
And relative to the size of their population, the military is massive.
Yeah.
So it's actually a highly militaristic society in that sense. And much like Egypt, the military is the most respected institution in Israel, and is generally beloved by the people and highly respected.
That's insane.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of murderers. Like,
yeah, I mean, the IDF is literally.
That's why it's like I just like can't feel for Israel. Like, it's like I try my best, and then it's like as soon as I start talking about it, I'm like, but at the end of the day, they somehow still believe that like all the things they're doing is acceptable, and it's just like no, like you're praising a horrible military.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I get the like talking points from somebody about like, oh, the IDF goes to great care to blah 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 blah, all good. I'm like, the fact is the IDF is the #1 child murdering institution on this planet.
Literally,
like number one.
Horrible.
And if I'm wrong, fine, name the other institution. One institution.
I know.
You know, not a conflict, you know, because more children are probably killed in Sudan than in Gaza. Potentially, I have to actually look at that. But in terms of murdered, one institution responsible, the IDF is #1.
Yeah, like they're terrible.
Institution on Earth. So let's hope that the Americans find a way to cajole, pressure, force the Israelis into some sort of ceasefire agreement to stop, because if they don't, then this ground invasion, probably potentially this week, if our listeners are listening to this, it may have already begun. I hope not. We all hope not. But if so, it's probably going to be the most dangerous, most destructive, most deadly phase of this war in its 19th month. 19 months. Imagine living in Gaza. You know, I just want to make this brief point. We're way over time here, but make this brief point before we sign off. Just thinking about like Canadians and Americans, and during the pandemic, you know, when we faced, well, at least here in Toronto, which had the most lockdowns in North America.
Yeah, those were dark days for you guys.
But the lockdowns, it was basically like, you know, at a certain point, the lockdowns were like, oh, you can't go to like cafes and movies and, you know, and it's just like big box stores that you can go to and blah, blah, blah. Like, it wasn't like a prison sentence. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't.
But people definitely acted like it was.
Yeah. And people pretended like it was the end of the world and it was the hardest. Like, I understand the frustrations. I get all that, blah, blah, blah. But when you look at what it really is like, when you are locked down and can't go anywhere, and when you don't have food, and when you don't have running water, and when you don't have electricity, and when you don't have healthcare, and you don't have anywhere to go, and there's nowhere safe, and no supplies, and no support, and and you're talking about 19 months. And not only that, because they endured 17 years before that of a siege in Gaza, and then it got significantly worse. So the idea that like and the fact that people here went, relatively speaking, through nothing even remotely.
No, just discomfort.
Yeah, discomfort.
The privilege
for the most part,
was seething during
but
the time.
It turned people crazy here.
It did, yeah.
Like, it was a spur to our radical right wing, like crazy. People lost their minds. They got this victim complex. Like, I remember seeing rich white people on vacation in the Bahamas complaining about how Canada took their freedom away. And I was like, you are on vacation.
Yeah, like that's the thing, is like they don't actually get it. Like, they don't know what that feels like. And like the reality is, like, and as the world shifts, like, you just might, like, America might actually feel what it feels like to lose their rights.
Well, that's the thing.
Consistently happening for them right now.
And I've always believed that, you know, in terms of an empire, what you do abroad in some ways comes back home to roost.
Yeah.
And very clearly America is experiencing that. I think Israel is clearly experiencing that as its society collapses. It'll probably devolve into a civil war or something like that. But, It's pretty grim. But just this idea that, like, we went through something so minuscule compared to what Gazans go through, and we went crazy. We lost our minds.
Yeah.
And so just the idea, like, for a fraction of a second to even just imagine what these people are going through on a daily basis. And then on top of all that, being bombed, being starved. It's so brutal. Even French President Emmanuel Macron came out yesterday or today and said that Netanyahu is something like unusually cruel and this is totally immoral and blah, blah, blah. So hopefully there's a turn taking place. It's always too little, too late.
Yeah.
But it's all we have at this moment.
Yeah, it's all we have at this moment.
And we just really have to hope that... God, I hate hoping that Trump would do something good.
I know. That's why I'm like surprised to hear you saying this. Because when I like try to have hope around Trump, you're like, there's no hope. I'm like, you're right.
Well, there isn't hope.
But
with
I get
Trump.
what you're saying. No, I get what
there's
you're
just there's only hope in that he gets pissed off at Netanyahu enough that he wants to be like petty. Exactly. Like the only time Trump can do something good is accidentally. If just like his current petty grievance happens to align with something reasonable, like stopping this fucking psychotic genocidal war and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And so let's hope that that takes place and that the next episode we come on, we don't have to talk about how it's gotten significantly worse, knock on wood. But I guess that's where we will have to end this episode.
There's nothing good to talk about. Like, it's like in the sense of like ending it on a good note. Like,
no.
Or else that would just be like fake. Like, it's like the reality is like what is happening is horrific and it's just getting worse. Yeah. And it's like, can only go two ways now. Like one of them isn't even like good, but it's better than where the other way it's going to go.
Yeah.
And it's just so frustrating.
Well, yes, we can hope for the best, but
we'll have an answer next week when we record together.
We sure
like,
will.
We will know like what's going on. So you guys will either hear us talking about like, just like Trump and how much of a fucking loser he is. Or maybe we might actually say like, oh, like Trump did something kind of okay.
Yeah, in between taking all his bribes.
Yeah, all his bribes and I don't know, like making a sexual innuendo at his own daughter. Like he is a freak, man. Like he is a freak. Like
Game of Thrones shit right there.
He is psychotic.
Yeah.
But he might be our only hope at this point. Like, how sad is that?
Well, and that's why the name of our podcast is In This Mad World.
This Mad World. Literally. Yeah. Like it, share it, spread it.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And please, we're posting these on YouTube now. I'm doing the editing work to post our videos on YouTube. Please watch them there. Please comment. Please comment under our videos. Like them, share them, but also post comments or questions that you want us to bring up and answer and take on in our podcast, because we can start doing that. We can take questions from listeners and even have entire episodes where we just try to answer listener questions. So wherever you listen to, so wherever you listen to our podcast, you can comment under the episode and I'll be sure to check it out. I'll check out all the places that our podcast is hosted so that we can check out the comments and everything that people might have. Or you could just email me the comments directly, Andrew at empireandeconomics.com. So thank you everybody so much for listening and come back again next week.
Bye guys.
In This Mad World is a podcast from empireandeconomics.com, hosted by Andrew Marshall, that's me, and Chelsey G. Music by Francesco Caruso. Please subscribe, like, and share. Visit empireandeconomics.com. Thank you for listening.